Hey everyone, and welcome to the GRC Room for Privacy from Basics to Practice. I'm Mike Andrews here once again with Karina Clever of Clever Compliance, and we're happy to welcome Jodi Daniels, who is the founder and CEO of Red Clover Advisors and host of the She Said Privacy, He Said Security podcast. There's a lot to talk about here, but before we get moving, just a couple of notes. Please feel free to leave comments, and we'll get to them as soon as possible. If it's not while we're live, it'll be shortly after. Also, if you haven't already, please check out the GRC Room YouTube channel where you'll find this webinar, the other ones, clips, and more. So, without further ado, let me pass it to Karina for a brief introduction, and then we'll learn more about Jodi.
Thank you, Mike. Jodi, we're so happy to have you. I'm Karina Clever of Clever Compliance. We're known for compliance management as a service, really establishing and maturing companies' GRC programs. So, question for Jodi, the first one. What trend in privacy regulation or enforcement do you believe companies should be paying attention to right now?
Well, first, thank you so much for having me. And actually, the very first trend is that enforcement is happening. I know that might seem kind of surprising. I think a lot of companies didn't see enforcement for a while. We saw a handful, probably half a dozen or so in 2025, especially out of California's privacy regulator known as Cal Privacy. And what's happening now is we're already into mid-March and there's been a handful. Enforcement is actually happening. The other trend I would like to remind people of, and I'm going to talk about where the actual enforcement areas are, but I do want to remind everyone, just because we don't hear about an enforcement action does not mean inquiries aren't happening. In speaking to a number of my privacy attorney friends, so full disclosure, I am a privacy consultant, not a privacy attorney. But I have a lot of good privacy attorney friends, and they all are sharing there's heavy inquiry activity happening. And what that means is we're just not going to see everything that is there, but regulators care. And so what are some of those themes? Well, the first is let's kind of go outward in, meaning by now we should have privacy notices that actually reflect what is happening in the organization. I still see broken privacy notices from a couple years ago, inaccurate privacy notices, ones that don't have what's required for California, global ones that don't cover what GDPR requires, and a long list of other challenges. So that's number one. Number two is going to be if you have some kind of cookie, pixel, ad technology on your site, that you're doing what it is you're supposed to be doing, depending on where it is that your customers and employees are from. Privacy laws focus on where the customer is from, not where you are. You could be in Tahiti having a lovely strawberry fruity drink, and your customers are all over the place. You have to pay attention to where they are. There are different requirements depending on where you are for all things related to ad tech. So enforcement is focused on, do you have what you need in place? And if you have it, is it actually working? A banner or a preference center that lets you reject, but then doesn't actually reject is not working. Does not work. In particular, California, do not sell or share. So many companies still don't have the required link in the footer of the homepage. The third major area is privacy rights. Privacy rights. They mirror across privacy laws a little closely. There's a few common themes like right to delete, right to access, right to correct, right to opt out. There's a few nuances across. But having actually a way to have an individual submit a request is one. Is it hard for me? And then the actual process that happens from there, am I in compliance with whichever law is in scope for you? And again, is it actually happening and is it actually working? That's kind of the outward facing in part. But then internally, and I know we're going to talk about all the goodies, it's all the other pieces. Are you reviewing? Do you have risk assessments? Did you pay attention to your vendors? And a variety of areas like that. But that's what I would have us start with so far.
That's some good information. So if any company listening today hasn't done much of anything around privacy yet, what are the first three things you'd recommend they do?
Number one is actually figure out which laws are in scope for the company. And sometimes I'll talk to a company and they'll say, oh, I don't need to worry about fill in the blank law. And actually they do need to worry about fill in the blank law. So the very first step is understanding where are your customers, where are your prospects, where are your employees, and what is it you need to do. I talked to a company, they reached out and asked for help for CCPA. We had an entire discussion that actually they're already targeting individuals in Europe. Guess what? They need to comply with GDPR today, not tomorrow or some future rollout. They're in scope today. So number one, figure out what it is, where you are. And again, this is based on where your customers and prospects are. You do not have to have a company headquartered there or have a human on the ground for you to be in scope for these different laws. Modern privacy laws have these special clauses to allow it to be kind of extraterritorial, meaning if you're serving the individual there, lucky you, you're in scope. So that's going to be number one. The next very important piece, you can't really comply with anything if you don't understand the data that you're processing. And a lot of, especially security teams and IT teams, focus on systems. I have these systems and this type of data in the system. And then it's often classified by some type of data classification policy that leans to a security-focused mindset of protecting data. We want to flip that in privacy because you see, just name and email in privacy matters. You could just have name and that's all you could just have email. It doesn't have to go together in privacy. You could be on a digital website and have a pixel and collect all kinds of other information, and that counts as privacy too. And what I mean by flipping is we really want to have a business process approach to understanding the type of data collected, how it's collected, how it's used or processed, how it's shared, and ultimately you're going to get to where it's stored. So see how we connect the where it's stored to how a lot of security IT teams kind of start, but we need the middle because the middle is how you write a privacy notice. Remember, I was talking about the enforcement priorities and what are we seeing? Well, they often start outside in because that's what they can see, outward facing. They all can see that. You can't write a privacy notice if you don't know what's actually happening. And to figure out what's actually happening, you start with that data inventory. And you need that as the core foundation for all the other parts of a privacy program. And you can start working your way around the various obligations. But first, you got to know which obligations. And second, you have to know the data.
That's so important. I have to jump in here because, one of the most important things we always talk about is data identification, data classification, data structuring, right? And making sure that you know what data you even keep. So we live in a data hoarding kind of environment, right? We are encrypting publicly available data because our salesperson told us we should encrypt everything, right? And so our data sets are becoming bigger and bigger and bigger. We're not leveraging data minimization, data purposefulness principles. So does that data align to your business? And then destruction and retention guidelines. We keep everything is not really a good way to conduct business because there has to be, at some point, you've got to cut yourself from the data you no longer need if it's not purposeful for your business, because the bigger your data set, the more liable you are. Get rid of it, right? And they show that you've gotten rid of it to reduce the liability. It's a huge risk.
100 billion%. So privacy laws actually state data minimization. And if anyone listening was ever trying to get someone to pay attention to that idea, go use a privacy law to help your cause, because they all say keep data for business purposes and then don't keep. Now, it's not going to tell you keep it for X number of years. It's going to say that data minimization. And I just wanted to add on a little bit, Karina, to what you were talking about with that classification, because it reminded me of a really important point and distinction. A lot of companies have a classification policy that has data with a sensitive label, and they've decided internally what is deemed sensitive. Well, from a privacy point of view, it often has a different definition of sensitive.
Yeah.
And we find that this is a missing area and that companies really need to match up which laws and their definition of sensitive to your current sensitive policy and then do forth what it is that you need to be doing.
Yeah. And we're seeing the breaches every day, right? Conduit, just 25 million records of personal health and personal health information that's actually lost. And, when we run the HHS OCR reports, and kind of healthcare is a bit different from, from privacy per se, from a consumer perspective, but 86% of the population in the US is impacted with a breach of their health information. That's like everybody. Those are our kids and our brothers and our sisters. It's just wacko.
Yeah, my daughter's a little older now, but when she was 1, she got her very first data breach notification. So the kids' data is very much in there.
Lock those social security numbers down, even for the little ones.
Yeah. Oh, great exchange. As Jodi alluded to, we hear data classification, we think about cybersecurity more. There are ways to leverage that more than companies are. And in cybersecurity, the documentation, the procedures, there's sometimes a disconnect to where it doesn't reflect what's happening in daily workflows or in system configurations. And I would say that's even more of a problem in the privacy world, because we hear privacy, we think privacy policy, that one page on the website. It needs to be more. You need to have a process for responding to those privacy requests, right? You shouldn't just have the privacy policy there and then someone actually takes you up on it and you're like, oh, no idea what to do next. So
yeah, I'll add that there's actually a lot of policies, just like security teams have a long list of policies. Well, we have them too. We have an outward facing privacy notice on a website. I know they're often called privacy policies. Fun fact, Privacy Pros actually would tell you it should be called a privacy notice, because we are providing notice to people like it's a HIPAA notice. It's supposed to be a privacy notice. Somewhere along the way, it became privacy policy, which is sort of just the cultural word. But the privacy policy is actually supposed to be internal. It's supposed to be the document that companies follow for how data can be used. Then we have privacy rights. What is the policy to manage privacy rights? We have risk assessments. What's the policy to conduct a risk assessment? We'll have data inventory. What's the policy to conduct data inventory? So we have lots of policies too in our little privacy universe.
Yeah, fantastic points. So those are the 2 questions for Jodi, and now we're going to bounce around to Jodi and Karina, kind of take turns. So let's start with Karina for this one here. So Karina, in this realm, how do you assess risk when companies are adopting AI tools that process consumer or other personally identifiable data?
So 2-sided answer to this one. First, AI is a tool. Treat it like any other vendor. Know where that data goes when you've entered in your information. Know how it's handled, who's got access to it. Do they have any external audit kind of certificates or reports, like a SOC 2, right, or an ISO 27001. 42001 is actually the one that's being used for AI. The second thing is, I remember back when the internet first started, right, and it was so convenient. Like, you didn't have to go to Bobby's house down the street to find the stuff in the encyclopedia and, oh, darn, the library's already closed. I want that source. I want the true information. And when the internet first came out, it was incredibly authoritarian. It was very, whoa, this has just made life so easy for convenience sake. And we thought that everything on the internet was true for like a really long time. And then we realized, wait a minute, it's not all true, because anybody can add stuff into the internet. AI is many times now just an exaggeration, many million-fold, of what's out there on the internet. And just like we treat with kind of rationale and cautionary kind of tale any AI outputs, we have to remember that just like we're biased, right? I mean, like, if I love bicycle riding, I'm going to have a group of friends who are bicycle riders too. And if I have an open rec and I have a position to hire, I'm going to go to my group of people that I trust and know for a long time. It's just an internal kindred that humans have. We're now seeing a lot of that bias be available in AI tools just from the way that they're being fed. And sometimes it's good and sometimes it's bad. Sometimes I'm issuing a drug and I want to know whether or not the reaction of that drug is different for a white woman versus an Asian woman versus an African American woman, right? Maybe sometimes maybe if there's a man that's taking this med, I want to know what the results of that kind of med may be on a particular type of person. So now we get into things like profiling, but pharmas have been doing this forever. So I think that we have to proceed with caution. It's not to say that it's not going to be fantastic, but some of the inputs to make it fantastic: know where your data is, classify that data, workflow that data, map it out, where it's traversing, where it's going, what you want out of it. If you don't have that workflow defined already, don't think that if you're going to slap AI on top of it, it's going to define it for you, because it's going to give you a biased answer. And if that's a mission critical workflow, just proceed with caution. I'm not even going to go into all of the cybersecurity risks that AI poses, but from a practical AI perspective, for just processing your daily operations and trying to have it enhance it, great. If you know your own business and you can define that workflow, rock on, because then you can give better instructions to the AI. You're on mute.
Sorry about that. Jodi, what do you think about this one, and specifically with AI? How does automated decision making play into it?
This is a little complicated because we have some privacy laws that specifically address this concept of automated decision making technology. And it's really about the kind of decision that is actually getting made. And you have to start first thinking about, well, did it have personal information? Because if it has personal information, it's going to trigger that privacy law. If it was, not personal information, you might have other laws that you might have to be contending with, but it might not be privacy. And so then you have to go to, well, what is that decision? Is there going to be a human override? Is there going to be any step of a human review? Or if it's 100% an automated decision, then you have to think about, well, which areas? Is it going to be in healthcare? Is it going to be in financial? Is it going to be in hiring? Did you have children's data? Do you have the extra sensitive areas? Well, then you're going to have privacy plus potentially AI regulations that you have to start thinking about. And what are we trying to think about? We're trying to avoid what we've likely always heard about: bias, and discrimination. So work backwards. Work from, what is the worst case scenario here? I have this tool, it could make this decision, and the individual could be truly harmed. I could be paying too much. I could be denied something. What are you doing to ensure that doesn't happen? And then as you're thinking about those controls to make sure that that worst case doesn't happen, along the way, part of that is going to be paying attention to the privacy laws, where automated decision-making technology might be here. That also requires you to have notice, requires you to have risk assessments, and depending on the decision, you might not even be able to do it. Just, again, kind of depends on the where you are. I find if companies work with that worst case scenario first, then they can build in the appropriate controls and blend where they need to be paying attention from a regulator or a law point of view, because that's the whole point that we're trying to prevent. It's not about not being able to use technology. It's about making sure that we didn't make decisions inappropriately. And when we didn't have technology and we had people had to have checklists. People had to have things so it was consistent, so that if I reviewed and Karina reviews, well, we had two people reviewing. So I could think one way, she could think another. Here's your standard checklist. Let's have scoring, kind of old-fashioned manual. If that moves to a technology, how do we just make sure the technology is doing the same level of consistency and doesn't make things up along the way or make drastic decisions that, again, could very significantly harm someone?
Yeah, that's a great take. So, Jodi, when you start working with a small or even a mid-sized company that's growing pretty fast, what privacy gaps do you typically see first?
Oh my gosh, so many. So the first one is that but this might sound a little similar to what I answered before, but it's true. They really don't know all the nitty gritty of the requirements that are in scope for them. So we have 19 comprehensive U.S. state privacy laws today. Very soon, we might have 20. Oklahoma is the closest one. And then we're going to have globally a variety of privacy laws. I'm in Georgia. I have no privacy law. What do you do about someone like me? And then the states don't always work alongside each other. And depending on the industry you're in, you might have extra special. Health, for example, has the Washington My Health, My Data Act is a unique law, and health shows up in other state laws, which means that's a lot I just rattled off. People listening might have gone, okay, I heard lots of laws. Good for you. That's all you probably need to know to say, I should probably figure this out. Who are the right people to help me figure that out? This is not where I suggest going to Google or your favorite LLM to search what are the requirements. It might have it right, it might not. And then you have to tailor it to what you're doing and think about what that's going to look like. Which means the biggest gap that I see is people really don't know what it is that they need to do, or they think they do and they got it wrong. I had one company adamant that employees weren't in scope for them and they didn't have to worry about California. They were 100% wrong. They had employees in California. They needed to pay attention to it, and they just were flat out incorrect. So I've seen a lot of things like that where they think one thing, but unfortunately it's actually wrong. Or then the next is resource challenge. They get started, they can do a little bit, but they can't finish the whole thing, or they're not quite sure exactly what to include. Maybe they have an assessment process. Maybe there's a security assessment process in place. How to add to capture privacy. That might be tricky, or to identify the right questions to make sure they're covering what they need to. Those are some of the areas that I also see them trying to kind of sort through, and just the operational part. How do I actually get privacy off of just being the policy and the document to being part of product or part of marketing or part? I also see they forget about HR because they forget that California employees and applicants might be in scope or globally. It's trying to make this really cross-functional thing work because it's new. You know, what I always like to remind people is when there's some new project, people never seem to forget to ask how much does it cost or how long it's going to take, what systems or IT needs to be involved. Hopefully they remember there should be a contract. A lot of times they remember that part. Privacy is new. It's something that is just not well understood. And it has a blend of compliance obligations. And I've spoken a lot about laws. It's not only laws. It's literally, what do you do about someone like me, Jodi in Georgia? Jodi doesn't even have a law. Does that mean you do anything with my data? Well, I hope not, because Jodi has expectations. I have a set of thoughts when I engaged with the company. What are you going to do with my data? And striking that balance of what I can do, what I should do, and how I do that is a very important element to privacy.
So I hope that everyone cares. A lot of people get incredibly dismissive when they receive those stacks of breach notifications. And I hope that it really incites some people to just go, wait a minute, right? Why did my kid receive a breach notification notice, right? Lock those social security numbers down. I think the one thing I'd like to add from a practical perspective is, if let's say Jodi comes into the client and does all of that heavy lifting, there's also the tactical workflow perspective of, oh, I just received a privacy request from Karina in California. What now? And a lot of people, right? So kind of two schools of thought. DSAR was coined by GDPR, data subject access right? Most US-based laws are written using not the word data subject, but consumer. So there's a consumer access request or consumer right request. And because it's not just access, you have all kinds of different privileges in different states that you can enact and ask a company to enact. So basically, the practical application of receiving that request and now routing it internally correctly to those groups. And again, identify where's your data, where are you sending this? A lot of technicians will receive, or outsourced technicians will receive these requests, and they'll be like, I don't know, right? They have no idea where it goes, how to handle it, where to scrub what data. Are you anonymizing? They don't have procedures on what to do when they receive this, right? How are you actually even handling this data? So this request. So basically identifying that data is critical, not just for knowing where that consumer data is, but also for internally not creating this confusion amongst your people on how that request actually is processed and fulfilled. How is it being tracked? I've heard so many people write me and say, I submitted the following access requests or the consumer privacy requests, and nothing ever happened. I never got an acknowledgement. I never got, meanwhile, time's gone by. Nothing ever happened. So if you're one of those companies, please figure out how to action these requests, because it's very important. Because the more you don't action, because you're confused as to where your data is and you don't have that workflow defined, the more liability you're putting on yourself, because eventually enough people are going to get pissed off to start calling the state and saying, hey, I submitted, and nothing ever happened.
100% agree. In fact, the Cal Privacy, who's the regulator in California, receives over 150 complaints per week right now. And they're reading those complaints and they're finding themes with those complaints. I fully expect that number will rise. They have a hardy staff that is over there. And here's the thing, your customers, that is a fundamental right that is there. And that we don't want privacy washing. We don't want you to have a privacy notice that has a link and it goes nowhere. And what you were talking about, Karina, with needing to know where the data is, that's what we were talking about earlier, because you have to know the data so you can start to honor privacy rights requests, privacy risk assessments, vendors. If I have a request, you have to know where my data is or you can't do anything, which means you got to start outward in. You got to have the process in place or the methods that someone can actually submit that request. Then you have to have someone who actually checks it. In fact, one of the enforcement actions last year, they never checked it. And then you have to be able to actually manage the workflow and come back and update it, because what you created with the workflow might not be the same, or your systems, right? The business is adding new systems and removing new systems all the time. California also requires you to train. Whoever's going to be responsible for privacy rights, they are required to be trained. And in every enforcement action where there was no training, that was noted. That was a hit. And a very fun fact, not just California, but across the board. Guess how regulators are reaching out to many companies? Hint, through the privacy rights process. So if you never check yours and they're reaching out to you, that's not a good start to your conversation with the regulator.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's a big one. We see this with new clients like all the time. Like I literally never went to a client, looked at their privacy policy and didn't see numerous holes in it. So Jodi, say a company realizes this stuff is important, but what's the fastest way that they can work to reduce exposure without hiring a full privacy team?
You don't need a full privacy team, but I do want to be thoughtful. I know everyone wants speed and to be quick. At the same time, you have to go thoughtfully and methodically. And the where people start is tied to what I had talked about before. So it might look different for each different team. If you're missing a privacy notice or you hear this conversation today and you go, oh my gosh, I looked at our notice and it's 3 years old, and you want to get started on that. Well, do you have a legal team? Who handles privacy today? Who wrote that the last time? And you want to kind of identify who owns privacy at the moment in your company and figure out where the gap is or who's going to own that, and then start to build what it is you need to do to address it correctly. Copying your competitors, not a good idea. What they do isn't what you do. Just a generator might not necessarily be accurate to capture all the uniqueness of your company. Maybe you're listening, you have a great privacy notice, but you don't think the cookie piece is working properly. Either find someone internally in your company who knows how to test it. Maybe just it's never been tested. Maybe your agency, if you have one of those, knows how to do it. Or you need to go and hire a third party and a consultant, which isn't a full-time, right? It's going to be a project to be able to make sure you have what it is in place. Karina, you and I were just talking about privacy rights. Go test the process. Someone go put the name in and see what happens. Find someone. It's like, mystery shopper. Go do mystery privacy rights and put that in and see what happens. It, depending on how much it's working or not working, is going to determine the level of effort. It might be you just need to make sure so-and-so is doing their job. It might be that it's so manual, this is horrible, you can't handle the volume. Well, maybe now you need some software in place. Maybe it's working, but there's not enough training, or you don't have anything new that's coming. It's real. I'm just a huge fan of right sizing to the company's needs. And again, what it is that they actually have to do. We have some companies, software is great. I have other companies, they don't get enough. So software, when it makes sense, they get a more manageable amount, and manual works for them. So it's really about understanding where your gaps are. I would recommend outward in. And when much like anything else, when the volume starts to put pressure and pieces are missed, you're not able to get to everything, that's where you need to start identifying how much either external resources do you need to help augment. Just like with vCISOs, we have fractional privacy officers. We're the FPO for a lot of different companies, but there's a variety of ways of how to solve the people part and the software. So software doesn't fix it all, and people don't fix it all. You got to blend it all together. You don't need a full-time person right away. There are many, many ways of how to solve that. You can't solve it, though, without knowing where your gaps are first. So I'm a big fan of trying to identify what those gaps are today.
Yeah, those are some great tips. Karina, do you have anything to add on this one? Like any strategies that you used effectively when you're trying to help a company?
I'm always back to the basics, right? Make the decision on what classification you're going to have, discover the data you already have, make a decision on retention, make a decision on backup, make a decision on destruction, tag your data the right way, right? All the way across the board, whatever kind of operational data you have, get rid of data that you don't need. And stick to that, right? So I think, to me, really getting intimate with structuring and mapping out your data and knowing which vendors are using your data. We had a client recently that turned on an API 8 years ago, a full access, sensitive personal information back and forth, right? Guess what? The contract with that vendor termed 3 years ago. Nobody has the password because Bob left, right? And now that API is still, where's it sending this data? A horribly extreme case that should have never been. But if you don't have that inventory, if you're not mapping your data all the way down to your vendors and asking those vendors, what are you doing with my data that I send you? And better yet, do you really need this really important data of ours to do the thing that we're hiring you to do? Try to see if you can reduce that scope a little bit. Get back to the basics and then create those workflows. And I want to really quickly mention, for any California consumers, drop, delete, request, and opt-out platform. And that the URL is https://privacy.ca.gov drop, right? So go in and enter in your data to have them actually delete as much as possible. For the data brokers, there's over 550 registered data brokers in the state of California. Why do we know about them? Because they're forced to do the registration. Are they in the rest of the US? Hell yeah. Right? So, but it's just, we have that identified in the state of California. So do your part and go in and say, I want out of all of this stuff. Convenience is the devil right now with our privacy data. And we're doing a whole bunch of things for that convenience that we really shouldn't be. Sorry, I went off on a bit of a tangent. Go ahead, Mike.
No, those are some good tips. Like in cybersecurity, we know third-party risk management is an issue, and that's the same in privacy, right? So you see companies use like flow-down agreements, because if we tell consumers that we're going to treat their data a certain way and we share it with someone else, even for a legitimate business purpose, we need to make sure they are as well. We can't tell consumers one thing and then our partner messes it up and we're like, oh no, that wasn't us, sorry. But we see that happen. Even big companies, they love saying it. a third party did that. Yeah, it's always a third party, right? It's never.
But it's on you. It's on you to
Yeah.
manage that third party. It's on you to decide how much you want to control that contract. It all comes down to the contract, right? So if you're not asking the questions, where are your subservice locations located, if like whatever US based privacy is important for you. If now some of these companies have such mass data sets, what's key in the data set? The further downstream it goes, the cheaper it is. Now, who the hell knows where it ends up, right? And it spider webs out exponentially because your 40 some vendors probably use a minimum of 40 vendors each. Do the math. So figure out what data you're sending to them and some of the things in that contract, just really quickly. Breach notification commitments instead of we will lawfully notify you. No. NIST 2 in Europe has very specific incident management notification requirements. Look that up and mirror that if you can, right? Not only breach notifications, but use of subservice organizations. We're completely releasing liability. So what can we do? We can say, wait, now I can actually control what I'm sending you, and I'm going to only send you the bare minimum to do the job that I'm hiring you for, dear vendor.
Yeah, great insight. So Jodi, say you go into a new company. How do you measure privacy program maturity beyond just we have policies? Like, what does a mature privacy function look like?
It's going to have that process piece behind it, and work is actually getting done. So, for example, we might look at risk assessment. So think a privacy impact assessment, or sometimes known as a data protection impact assessment, and in California, a privacy risk assessment, all required under a variety of different scenarios. And maybe there's a policy that says we're going to do them. So we're going to actually want to see, what does the template look like? Do you have an assessment template? When was it last updated? Do you have some that are completed? And we're going to actually look to see how are they conducted. Does Susie know when to go and do it? Is it in a centralized place? How often are they consistent over time? That's going to help us understand the maturity. I once worked with a company and they said they had a data inventory. Okay, great. Oh, and we update it once a year. Amazing. Let's look at it. It was one page that, and I'm not kidding, it was one page that covered one part of their product. Well, that didn't cover a data inventory as an example. So it's really around asking those kinds of questions. If you just have something, how often is it done? Is it done consistently? Is it done well? Do different parts of the business know what that looks like? If I have cookie consent, maybe they have a banner up, maybe it's functioning. Okay, well, how does a new pixel get up on the site? How is that reviewed? Is there a contract connected to that review? How often is the cookie consent software actually tested? Each of those questions give a hint to the level of maturity. We talked about vendor. There might be a mature vendor program. How does privacy fit into that? Where does privacy come in? We worked with one large company, and privacy was over here and vendor was over there. And the vendor procurement team knew nothing about privacy. No, I can't answer your questions. Don't talk to me. That's their problem. Yeah. That's not a mature program at all in that domain. And you can have a complete, so we look at each kind of privacy subdomain and then add it all up holistically to get the overall privacy program. You can be mature in a few areas and very immature in others. And, you kind of like work your way on up.
I am screaming at the screen right now because that's absolutely true. And I think a great opportunity for senior leaders is to try to close that gap. The silos that they've created for efficiency, work for efficiency, right? Because I don't want somebody in my manufacturing space to go do payroll. Makes sense, right? I mean, we have our specialties and we have our kind of competency areas in our organizations. However, consumer data and how it's used, employee data, traverses all of those areas. And if it's so isolated and segmented, just makes it really, really hard to be able to have that cross-functional conversation. And so the challenge from this call, I think, for a lot of the senior leaders out there is ask the probing questions. Find out what that workflow is for that continuity across all of these organizations, because you'll never get ahead of it if you have blinders on for any of the organizations, including senior leadership.
Yeah, great point. So, Jodi, what actually determines whether a state privacy law even applies to a company? Is it sometimes revenue thresholds, like number of consumers that they're dealing with, the data volume,
Yeah,
or what?
great. It's a fun question, and it depends by state. Every state has their own unique threshold. Remember, I said we're up to 19 comprehensive, almost 20. And then I also mentioned Washington, also a different threshold. So you have to go by state. California is the only state right now that covers, and Karina, you mentioned the US uses consumer. It's the California Consumer Privacy Act, not to be confused with the concept that consumer in California actually means consumer, like you and me buying all kinds of things we may or may not have actually needed delivered by big, large trucks that are brown and purple. And then it also includes B2B and employee. So California is the only state right now that includes B2B and employee. To be in scope for California, it is one of three, only one, not all three. It is 26 point a few dollars. It used to be 25 million. I think it's 26.2 now for inflation this year. And if your company earns globally that number, not in California, but globally, and you have Californians in your pool, or you're targeting Californians, or you have one Californian employee, you are in scope for the CCPA. Number two for California might be 100,000 Californians. There's a couple different ways of how you might calculate that, but you're basically collecting, sharing, selling, storing, like something about Californians. The third is the smallest pool, ties very much to the drop and delete act that Karina was mentioning. The third potential option is you earn more than 50% of your revenue from the sale of data. California has a unique definition of sale. This is the monetary sale. Like you actually are making money. That's data brokers, a very unique set. For the majority of every other state, with the exception of 2 or 3, then we move to number of consumers, which it fluctuates anywhere from 35,000 to 175,000, depending on the state, and or the sale part. So many states are also trying to get to those data brokers. So again, kind of us, if you're listening, you're a data broker, lucky you, you're probably in scope somewhere. If you're sort of just not a data broker, but maybe you're under the $26 million, it depends on how much data you're actually processing. If you were $26 million and over listening and you are fairly national, you're probably in scope for California. If you're a consumer-focused company, though, you have to look at that volume across to figure out if you're actually in scope. There are two or three states where I said it's revenue and consumers. It's Utah and Tennessee, and I can't remember if one of the more recent states might have adopted that same philosophy, but very narrow for that. And here's the one part I'm going to remind you of. Your consumers have no idea everything I just rattled off for 3 minutes. They are not paying attention to scope. They don't know. They just are accustomed to seeing maybe a privacy notice because a company adopted something for California for everybody. And now their expectation is you're supposed to do that as well. And then you have to think about the people like myself who live in states with no privacy law. And what do you do about them?
Yeah.
If you've identified your data, you have to tag the states where that consumer data is coming from, because some of these states, the other thing is they have different fulfillment requirements for the timeline. The majority of them are 45-day fulfillment requirements. Some are 60, some are 45. Then you get into innuendos for marketing data versus other kinds of data. Then you get into, how many times can I appeal or request in a certain time period? So the workflows that you have to define for this, not only are you locating that data, what state that consumer is coming from, and you also need to have the fulfillment requirements in place, verification requirements in place for doing that fulfillment on time and satisfying those requirements.
Yeah. The one addition I have is some states, like in Nevada, if you're already like a financial company and you have to deal with the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act, or some HIPAA covered entities, the state law doesn't apply to you because I think they must view that you're good to go. You're already dealing with that. And if you do what you're supposed to do in that realm, then you don't have to think about the privacy. So that's kind of one
carve out. That's a great carve out, because at the bottom of CCPA, there is a paragraph that I think was just submitted last second that says, if you abide by HIPAA or GLBA, this doesn't apply to you. If you're already a company that adheres to that, this doesn't apply to you.
So actually, it gets more complicated than that, if I may share, because there is entity level exemption and data level exemption. CCPA is a data level exemption. And if you have to comply with GLBA or HIPAA, what it means is that data, that is excluded. But when I just show up at your homepage and I just engage with you and I'm not covered by HIPAA or GLBA, or I engage with your organization some other way, that data is covered. But there are other states where it's an entity level exemption, which is interesting because the HIPAA and GLBA requirements do not cover all the personal data of the organization, as the data exemption states have identified. So the state that actually has the data exemption is giving better coverage to that individual. The states that exempt the entire entity is better for the company because it makes the company have easier compliance, but it's actually not as good from a consumer standpoint. And again, you have to go state by state and figure that out. And what I'll say is I also see some companies choosing not to go state by state. They just kind of say, like, you sort of have to go state by state and almost go with like funny squiggly lines, because if you just went with California, you would not capture everything that you need to. There are other states on the Eastern Seaboard that have more strict compliance obligations than California does. So you end up with trying to find the best, and then they kind of apply it across the board.
Yeah, that's great tips. Like our company, for example, we're small. So what I do to be squared away in this regard is take all the active privacy laws, line them up with the requirements for each, sort them, look for the differences, and add it in. Because it's not like our company's getting 1,000 requests. We get like no requests at all. So if we get a request, if say something is required in California, but it's not required in another state, I would just grant the other states those privileges. To me, it's just easier because we have such low volume. That obviously changes if you get a lot of requests. But
that's a really common approach, Mike, that you're taking is very common that I see with other companies as well.
Oh, that's cool. So we talked a lot about CCPA. So Jodi, there's been some recent talk of like updates, some changes going on with CCPA in the past few months. Can you tell us about that?
Well, starting January 1st, 2026, there are a couple new ones. One of them was automated decision-making technology, and I kind of alluded to that one a little bit. There's going to be some disclosure requirements that are going to come out in the next couple of years regarding that, as well as privacy risk assessments, which is actually the other really big one. Privacy risk assessments are technically required as of January 1st, 2026, and some leader in your organization is going to need to attest that they have actually conducted them. And this is kind of similar if your organization has to deal with Sarbanes-Oxley. It's sort of a similar kind of thing. You have someone attesting to, we actually have controls, we have tested, we have done something, kind of a similar situation. And it's a bit of I think it's 2028 when you actually are going to have to do that. But for some organizations, this is a long process to be able to get there. And forgive me on my dates. Please don't hold me on my dates. There's so many different dates. I am really good at them, but sometimes you get them all slightly mixed up. And I don't have any notes, all from memory at this particular moment. So, but the January 1st, 2026, totally 100% accurate. If you haven't started privacy risk assessments the way California requires them, you are 2.5 months behind. Now's a great time to go get started. The other is going to be cybersecurity audits. And cybersecurity audits are going to be a requirement to have a third-party auditor audit your cybersecurity practices. Now, many people listening are going to say, well, but I already do that. I do a SOC 2 and I do an ISO. And that very well may work. So what's happening is those firms that conduct those audits are lining up. Here's the CCPA requirements. And they're going to be able to say, see, you're covered. Oh, wait, you have this over here.
Mm-hmm.
That Cal Privacy can't make a law that says you must comply with this particular standard. They can't do that. So what they did is they looked at all the different standards, came up with their list that is important for them, and it pretty much lines up with industry standard. So if you are an organization who already does these audits, I encourage you, go call whoever your auditor is and ask them, hey, show me how you're lining up what you're doing for us to CCPA requirements, and you'll be able to move forward from there. If you're an organization who doesn't have one of those and you've been trying to get one, now's a really good time. This might be a great time to be able to push forward the need to have one of those audits, because it's like a 2-for-1 special. If that's not going to be something that you can do, then you can just go shopping for a cybersecurity auditor, because you're going to need that. And that is also a phased approach over the next 2 years, depending on the size of your company. There's sort of different requirements for when you need to actually have that all ready to go. And then the third one is, last one is just to echo what Karina said regarding the Delete Act. If you listening are a data broker, you needed to have been registered. April, I believe, is the deadline. And then consumers have been registering since January 1st. The entire system goes live in August. If you are listening and buy data from a data broker, you're just a good old-fashioned company buying the data. Yay for you. Guess what? Your data pools will start to be smaller come August. And over time, it will get smaller. It is a couple 100,000 people. It's probably mid 200s at this point, who have already registered as of January 1st when California opened it. They have not done any actual advertising yet. And it's already been 200,000+ people. And there are other states looking at trying to do the same thing that California has done.
Wow. So, Karina, do you have anything to add on this one? And how do you think it's going to change things for the types of companies you work with?
Well, I mean, I think that's what we've all been talking about, right? I mean, the knowing where your data is, tagging the data the right way, making sure you're doing so. So NIS2, NIS2 in Europe actually has some very strong cybersecurity requirements. That the top of the pyramid in that law is risk management program that includes very heavy supply chain oversight and visibility. And we even saw with NIST, CSFV2, right? We saw that government ban be published, which, I mean, I was literally jumping up and down from joy on that one, because the supply chain is just so intricate in that. And, 27701 came out just in October, focused on privacy, and it's a great way to integrate and weave that guidance in. So it's almost like whatever and HIPAA's been trying to do it. HIPAA is unfortunately one of the biggest fails, and I for the life of me, most of the reasons that HHS OCR gives as reasons for their data losses are all GRC things. They're all GRC things that unfortunately are just it's an oversight by the company, or it's a vendor management issue, whatever it is. So really, I think just coming back down to exactly what Jodi said: know your business, know your posture, have a program, have a workflow, know your data. I mean, it's just managing your own operations and then referencing those external influences. Your regulations, your framework should influence your operations, but you got to know your own posture and your own landscape before you can actually do a sufficient amount of integrating the recommendations and the controls required from those regulations and frameworks into your own company.
Good insight, Karina. So Jodi, we talked briefly about the similarities and differences state to state. I mentioned how I handle it at my company by lining them all up. Do you have a better way to do that? How should companies be managing this so they're not missing anything, but they're also not managing 20 different programs?
Well, I don't think you need to manage 20 different programs. Companies might need to manage 20 different laws. I think this is akin to tax and HR. if you think about each different state, there are different HR requirements and there's federal requirements. You might be a health organization or financial organization. You have HIPAA at federal and financial at GLBA, but you might have different state obligations as well. We don't actually have a national federal privacy law. And those organizations built compliance programs to be able to handle both of those requirements. For HR, again, I'm going to have national HR requirements, national tax requirements. I'm also going to have potentially state and local. You have a finance team or an HR team who is working through, here's my compliance program. I might have a policy that has 50 states if I have 50 employees, or 10 states or 8 states, right? You kind of get the idea. The same is true for privacy. So every time there's a new state that comes along, each HR and finance team they can't ignore it. They got to go figure out what the differences are and plug it into their respective processes. The exact same thing has to happen in privacy. This is a really big difference of privacy versus security, because, I mean, until you have a data breach law, you have all the different nuances, but you don't actually have, well, hopefully your organization is not having a data breach every day. If so, there's probably a lot of security people here that would be happy to talk to you. In privacy, it's every day. Every single decision, every single day is impacted. And the privacy laws are picky. They are different. You cannot ignore a new state privacy law. We didn't even talk about AI regulations, but there's new AI regulations that also have personal information. And so you do kind of need to end up comparing. Now, maybe it's you in the organization, if you're listening and you compare. Maybe you work with an outside firm to be able to help you compare. Maybe there's a software that helps you compare. But somehow you're actually going to have to do that. And you're building, though, your privacy risk assessment process is one process. It just has to make sure it covers whichever special risks across all of those states. And I'm just using that as an example. It'd be no different. Privacy rights, you got to make sure you have a workflow that's going to be able to manage the different time frames, the different rights, the different obligations as you need.
Yeah, that's a good point. This goes into like the way we talk about cyber risk not being viewed as business risk, even though it is. It seems very similar with privacy. Like you gave the example of HR and accounting. We do need to think of cybersecurity and privacy that way. Karina, do you have anything to add on this one?
No, I think that's a great analogy, that we need to look at things with that much specificity per state. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So we're getting towards the end. That's the last of our questions. We really appreciate you joining us, Jodi. So do you have any closing remarks, and where can the audience find you?
So first, the best place to find me is right where we're talking, LinkedIn. So please connect, please follow. I put out a significant amount of content really aimed at trying to simplify and help people understand privacy. So my closing remarks is, it might feel overwhelming. It might feel really different. Much of these different requirements do overlap, and it's just piece by piece to be able to build. So I would start with knowing which jurisdictions are in scope for you, having a plan. Don't look the other way, and begin with knowing your data, and then you can just build over time. That's all the regulatory piece. The fun piece for me is that privacy is around trust. People are buying the product and security. Obviously, they don't want to have a data breach. They're trusting you with the information, but they're also trusting from a privacy side. There's a long list of regulations because companies pushed the envelope and didn't do what the customer expected. They did too much. And if we look at it like from that lens, then it makes more logical sense why I need to describe what I'm doing, why I need to have privacy rights, why I need to have a policy or a process. It just makes more sense. And not only this compliance checkbox, because that will only get you so far.
Awesome. We definitely made the right decision to invite you on here. That was awesome. Karina, do you have any closing remarks, and where can the audience find you?
So I'm on LinkedIn. I'm also going to be at RSA next week. So please find me and write me a note. We'd love to meet you in person. Closing remarks, lock your kids' social security numbers down and stay off of social media. I hate to say it, but a lot of people are just relinquishing a whole bunch of private information about their families and giving the bad guys real traceable bits of information about how to find you and where the kids are in school and where you work, and just stuff not necessary to give the whole world.
Yeah. Great great tips. That was awesome. You can find me on LinkedIn as well. I know I invite a bunch of people. Karina invites a bunch of people, but feel free to connect with the other party, and Jodi as well. And we appreciate you being here with us, especially on a Wednesday when you have a lot of other stuff going on. So thank you. And for April, we will be announcing the next event on Monday, and it's gonna be a really good one, going back towards cybersecurity. So thanks so much, and have a great day.
Thanks
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.